So I wanted to just mention what is the agenda for today's webinar. So I am already doing the welcome and housekeeping. We'll have opening remarks by Ramon from BGR, is our team leader of the Sustainable Groundwater Development team. And then we'll have a keynote presentation by Dr. Jacobus Gruen from the World Bank. And we'll have insights from Water Mission and from Meta. And finally, we'll have time for Q&A and discussion, and the closing remarks will be given by David Inman from Water Mission, which is the other team leader of Sustainable Groundwater Development. So next slide, please. So I would like to hand over at this stage to Ramon, that will be our main moderator for the first half of today's webinar, and David will come later on for the Q&A portion. So Ramon, as I already mentioned, is the team leader for Sustainable Groundwater Development, and he works as a project manager for the Federal Institute of Geosciences and Natural Resources, or BGR, from Germany. So Ramon, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Aline, very much. Also from my side, welcome very much to our webinar on groundwater and climate resilient water solutions for rural water communities. Before we start with the speakers today, I would like to explain why we choose this topic for the webinar. The first reason is also the theme for the World Water Day this year was groundwater and was water and climate action. So we thought we could maybe adapt to this theme this year and see what the discussion could maybe bring some more ideas and inspiration for future events. Nevertheless, groundwater plays also a crucial role in climate adaptation. I believe it's maybe the most important water resource for climate adaptation. And groundwater is less affected than surface water in climate change. So this is the reason why there is a great potential on it. And before we now hear from our brilliant speakers about their experiences with groundwater, I like to give you a few facts on the way and into this event today, with a focus on Sub-Saharan Africa, which I think is not limited to Sub-Saharan Africa, but in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's very obvious how the potential of groundwater is to maybe tackle many challenges we face on the continent. The first is what we see here on that slide is the drought vulnerability. You see here there's 3 regions which are very much affected by droughts, and the Horn of Africa region is here in Ethiopia. We see the drought events between 1999 and 2022. And we see that there have been 8 droughts. That means every 3rd year is a drought in that region. Next slide, please. And these droughts also lead to many problems, and maybe the most obvious is the food insecurity. And we see that from 2015 to 2024, this data is from 2024, the number of people who are affected on the continent by food security increased from 200 to around 300 million. Next slide, please. And at the same time, we noticed and recognized, especially the last 10 years, that there is still quite significant potential of groundwater resources. This here is a study from the British Geological Survey, who reveals that except of the countries of the MENA region in Northern Africa, all countries in that region have more than 25% of the renewable groundwater resources are not used until today. And many countries have even more even don't use more than 10%. Next slide, please. And even if there's somehow enough groundwater, just 3% of the total agricultural land is irrigated, even in drought regions. And from these 3% of the irrigated agricultural land, just 5% are irrigated with groundwater. So that means there is still a huge potential to use more water for irrigation in these regions. Next slide, please. And this is a study that we discovered just a couple of months ago, beginning of the year. Was just recently published. These are results from gravity data of some satellite missions of the GRACE mission, and they measure the total mass on land surface. So that means there is just one element that is that dynamic that it is within a few years or within one season is moving, and this is water. And if we have a higher gravity and we measure a higher mass, then we measure the water, which is increasing or decreasing. And what we see here is we have three lines. There's a red line that is the surface water. And important is then the blue line, which is the groundwater. And what we see here is that the red line is decreasing between 2002 and 2022. So the groundwater, as the surface water resources, have been decreased on the continent, and the groundwater resources have increased. So this means that these climate risks will increase in the future if this trend continues. But on the other hand, there's a huge potential that groundwater resources could cover these climate variations and buffer these water shortages and have even maybe some potential for socioeconomic development. So this just as some facts I would like to introduce this webinar, and would like to give the word now to Dr. Jakob Grön, or just shortly Koos. He is a hydrogeologist with over 40 years experiences from, I think, 24 countries, what I read. And he is currently engaged in the World Bank project at the Horn of Africa. And he would like to speak about misconceptions in groundwater projects. And yeah, I'm very curious to hear what your experiences have been the last decades on groundwater projects. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ramon, and welcome to everybody participating in this webinar. As a hydrogeologist and a World Bank consultant, I often had to review all kinds of documents related to groundwater projects, like concept notes, project plans, terms of reference. And it struck me that these documents sometimes contained, what I should say, shortcomings or misconceptions related to groundwater. And this can be problematic because it's difficult to get a project on the right track after starting off with these misconceptions. Now, one of them is, for instance, the understanding that groundwater is under stress because of climate change, which would result in less recharge to aquifers. And yeah, climate is indeed becoming more erratic in general. Droughts seem to last longer, occur more frequently. And this undoubtedly leads to problems, water shortage, wells running dry, famines. But does groundwater recharge really decrease everywhere? And here is a map of a recent publication in Nature. I hope you can show this. Is it? Yeah, it's on the screen. And it's and this map is a bit counterintuitive because you see that the blue parts are the areas where the recharge seems to increase in future. And that is particularly look at the Horn of Africa, and which is one of the most drought-stricken part of the world. But it seems that on the long run, the recharge is increasing. Other areas like the Mediterranean seem to get more affected. There is less recharge in future, and according to these models. On the other hand, groundwater availability could also decrease because of overexploitation. But is rural water supply responsible? Well, let's look at the Horn of Africa again. As I'm involved in, like Ramon said, in this World Bank project in this region, especially in the borderlands. Natural recharge in this area is not very large. It's something in the order of, let's say, 10 millimeters per year, or 10,000 cubic meters per year per square kilometer. We may consider this as a sort of measure for the renewable groundwater resources. On the other hand, the water demand for drinking water supply is also not very large. With population density in this area of about 15 people per square kilometer or less, water demand is only a few % of these renewable resources. This, of course, is a rough approximation. In Somalia, we studied this in more detail, and we saw that in most districts, the percentage was not more than 10%. So this is below the UN scarcity index of 20%. And it does not seem to be very alarming. But note that I'm talking about rural water supply, where urban water supply and large-scale irrigation comes into play. It's a completely different situation. But this is just a water balance approach. Of course, there is water scarcity, and water facilities are lacking, and many are non-functional due to lack of resources and capacity. And that's what we call economic water scarcity. Now, with this notion of reduced recharge and overexploitation, we see that managed aquifer recharge, MAR, is becoming a common coping strategy, also in rural water supply projects. But with what I just said, one can question whether such a strategy is always appropriate. I'm talking about rural water supply all the time. Note this. But apart from that, I noticed that the functioning of these proposed managed aquifer recharge is often not well understood. I see documents where MAR facilities are proposed to recharge regional aquifers. However, the impact of a single facility, such as a recharge pond or an injection well, is quite small compared to the natural recharge of the entire aquifer. You would need large areas with ponds and many wells to make a substantial contribution. Now, it's doubtful whether an organization or community will be motivated to maintain such a facility without experiencing noticeable benefits. Instead of engineering-like construction, nature-based solution with input from local communities may be better alternatives. And I see that other speakers this afternoon will talk more about this. And then these nature-based solutions, they often have to do with sustainable land use and agricultural practices like terracing and bunds and to retard surface runoff. But like I said, you will hear more about this later on. However, these measures must fit in the livelihoods of the communities. And for the pastoralist communities in the borderlands of Horn of Africa, this is questionable. Most of these solutions are not applicable in these areas. Now, apart from the scale of the intervention of managed aquifer recharge, there is the question where the infiltrated water from the MAR facilities will go to. Groundwater flow is complex and three-dimensional. Can I have the next slide? Is it on the screen? No, this one before, I think. Yeah, that one. Now, we see, like I said, it's three-dimensional. You see various superposed flow systems. In some part of the landscape, infiltrated water will only travel short distances and in shallow layers. But in other parts, it may enter deep regional systems. So it makes quite a difference where you position your MAR facilities. But even locating these facilities like infiltration ponds close to wells, wells with experienced depletion, is not always effective. The wells may abstract water from confined aquifers, which you can see in the next slide. The next slide, please. Yeah. Now you see a well, a borehole, a deep borehole, positioned in a confined aquifer. Now, if you want to recharge such a well, you need actually an injection wells. But these are the operation and maintenance of this kind of systems is not within the capacity of local communities. So MAR managed aquifer recharge can best be restricted to shallow aquifers. And when we think we mostly think of things like sand dams and underground dams and bank infiltration wells, which would be the best options. Maybe this will be discussed by others in the later speakers. Then the thing of the siting and drilling of wells. There are many issues related to well drilling. And the terms of reference for these activities are often not up to standards, I've noticed. I just mentioned the problem of water quality, maybe the main problem in the Horn of Africa project, our World Bank project. We have natural and geogenic pollutants like fluoride and salinity. Now, these could be avoided to some degree by up-to-date well siting and drilling methodologies. But also alarming, I would say, is the presence of high nitrate content and coliform bacteria, even in deep wells. These come from man-made sources near the well and have entered the well directly. So well construction and protection is often not well prescribed in these terms of reference. And also the supervision is often lacking or not efficient. And then we have the idea of deep aquifers tapping gigantic reserves of fresh groundwater, which would solve all problems. I'm talking about depths of 600 to 700 meters. With regard to this, I see very optimistic project documents and proposals. And it seems as if people assume that deep fresh groundwater is definitely there, everywhere. It's only a matter of finding them. However, results were not always that positive. So if proposed methodologies are vague or not up to standards, be cautious. Because note, these are very expensive boreholes, sometimes $500,000 to $1 million. You can question whether this is actually viable for rural water supply. Now, what to do about this lack of groundwater knowledge? Capacity development and training programs are often proposed. But these take a long time and require separate projects. And even then, agencies involving groundwater projects, either in financing, policy making, or project execution, do not always have the state-of-the-art groundwater knowledge at hand. So I suggest something more direct and quite simple. Be critical towards all those terms of reference and project briefs and concept notes. And this is my main point, get an experienced, knowledgeable, and independent hydrogeologist to review the documents and note the word independent. And let him or her weed out the misconceptions, unfounded assumptions, and expectations. It takes maybe a few days, but I know from my experience, you could save thousands, if not millions of dollars. And maybe more important, prevent disappointment in the communities where we all work for. thank you. This is, I hand it over to you, Ramon.
Ramon, I think your audio needs to come on.
Ah, okay.
Oh, thank
Ramon?
you. Thank you, David. Yeah, thank you, Koos, for your presentation. So we have maybe time left for one question. There's one from Muthi Lema about the climate change and groundwater recharge map that is really counterintuitive.
Yes.
What would be happening that could be influencing this projected trend? So what do you think, what is influencing this trend, or what could be done by, how I understand, like by humans to influence this trend?
But do I understand it well? It's indeed counterintuitive, that's for sure. So there are two things. I mean, if climate change, it can change in the way that you have more erratic climate. You have periods of long droughts, which are, I mean, are devastating in terms of water levels going down, wells drying up, and that sort of thing. But these are periodic events, but maybe there are also events where you have a lot of rainfall, even floods. So the groundwater recharge, you have to take everything in account. Also these, let's say, more wet periods. So I haven't read this article very well. I just saw it last week, and but I know from, but that's not Africa. I'm also working in Latin America. I did a recent project where we found out the same thing. Climate was changing, but it did not lead to decreased groundwater recharge, and that's becoming this the overall effect of wet periods and dry periods. May turn out that in the end there is more recharge or not a decrease in groundwater recharge.
Okay, thank you, Koos. This is quite interesting. Also, combination to the slides I presented at the beginning.
Yes, I
Also
know.
increased, at least some cases, maybe it's even increasing. That was really helpful, I think, also to see the importance of data and information in designing projects. And I think this is one of the main challenges and that have to be tackled to unlock the potential of groundwater for socioeconomic development and livelihoods. So with our next speaker, we go more into the project design on the ground. And our next speaker is Lara Lampert. She's from Water Mission, originally from South Africa, and currently serves as the director of program development. She's leading a team, what I've seen, that's with a quite broad variety of expertise. So you have to tackle a lot of different fields of expertise in the wash sector, but also finance, behavior change, communication, monitoring, evaluation, research, learning. I think a broad band of expertise, I think, which is necessary to have a successful project implementation, because from one field of expertise, it's very success is very limited. But I'm very curious to hear more about your experiences from the project design and management. Thanks, Lara. You have the word.
Thanks, Ramon, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I think I'm possibly maybe the only non-hydrogeologist on the call today. No, I'm just thrilled to be here and excited to speak with you today on behalf of our team at Water Mission. Like Ramon mentioned, I serve as the Senior Director of Program Development at Water Mission. And so today I get to share some insights into how groundwater can serve as a cornerstone of a climate resilient water solution for rural communities. And so I'm honored to be part of this RWSN event and looking forward to engaging with you. And so to provide some context, I'll share a little bit about Water Mission and where we work. You can advance the slide. Water Mission, we are a Christian engineering nonprofit that designs, builds, and implements safe water and sanitation hygiene solutions in both developing countries and disaster areas. And so to date, we've served more than 8 million people in 60 different countries. You can see on the slide there. We've got permanent field offices located across mainly East Africa and Southern Africa, as well as Latin America and Southeast Asia. And we're working both in development contexts as well as humanitarian settings, so refugee contexts as well. And our mission is to build safe water solutions that can break through the global water crisis, but that mission is increasingly influenced by the climate crisis. And though I'm not a climate change expert, I think we at Water Mission have definitely seen an increase in climate-related disruptions, even in the areas that we currently work, and many of you can probably say the same. So today I'd love to share just, since our theme is on groundwater, so why groundwater and why now? We can advance the slide. So there's many reasons. I think most notably, we see that 1 in 3 people globally still lack access to safe drinking water. This is just a staggering number, and it's certainly an urgent challenge. Climate change is making things worse by increasing variability, reducing reliability in surface water sources. And also we see that groundwater, in contrast, provides about 50% of the world's drinking water, and it's a critical part of the solution. I think that it's essentially vital for rural communities where infrastructure is often limited, where resilience is often most needed. There's been new estimates that have come out recently that states that it's really over 4 billion people that are lacking access to safe water. And so I think that it really forces us as the WASH sector to innovate in how we meet this challenge. And climate change is disrupting traditional water sources that we've relied on in the past, but groundwater remains, we feel like, comparatively buffered from these disruptions. And I think it's time to recognize the role that groundwater plays in our climate adaptation toolbox. So you'll see here, I'd like to share just a few characteristics of groundwater and what makes it resilient. So for starters, it's less vulnerable to surface evaporation and extreme weather events. We know this. It's stored naturally in aquifers, and it's often located closer to the communities that need it, often just right under the ground in which we're walking on. And with proper management, groundwater can be recharged and maintained as a sustainable resource. We're going to learn a little bit more about that later from Meta. And so in many ways, it offers both the physical and the logistical resilience. We feel like making it a smart foundation for rural water supply systems. But I think most importantly, only if we manage it properly. So the next slide, please. So there are climate-related risks and other challenges that I think we need to address because climate change adds complexity. So it's important to recognize what these risks and challenges are. Over abstraction, we see can lead to aquifer depletion, land subsidence, and deteriorating water quality. Climate change can also reduce recharge rates by altering rainfall patterns and infiltration. So we see, with rainfall patterns, there could be less reliable recharge. Perhaps it's a drought and we have an increased dependence on groundwater. Flooding often leads to a higher risk of contamination. And then it's also just harder to predict with groundwater without the availability of the data. And so just the lack of data perhaps makes it a bit harder for us to predict. And then there's contamination, whether this is naturally occurring, like arsenic or fluoride, or perhaps it's introduced through agriculture or poor sanitation. Those are risks around water quality. And then there's social risks. Lack of regulation can lead to inequitable access of the source, where perhaps wealthier groups or industries that drill privately, often will then leave vulnerable populations behind. And so we need to confront these challenges. Over pumping of groundwater, pollution, poor planning can sometimes lead to irreversible damage. And we've seen that in other parts of the world, for example, India. And just social inequalities can be worsened. We think that if groundwater access is privatized or mismanaged as well. So I'd like to share just some considerations for Those of you that are practitioners, when you're considering choosing groundwater over surface water, so you'll see, surface water also has its challenges. We see a higher chance of fecal coliform, turbidity, pesticides, protozoa, nitrates, nitrites, and many of these require quite significant treatment technologies. So often, perhaps filtering or reverse osmosis. So there are challenges when it comes to relying on surface water. Groundwater also has its challenges. We see sometimes, this is all contextual, but we do see higher total dissolved solids at times. So it could be higher hardness or salinity or iron or manganese, arsenic, fluoride. There's the potential for higher TDS. We also see, it's important to get better understanding of what the expected borehole yield will be. So looking at just transmissivity, storability, the recharge potential, and ensuring that we're not overdrawing from the aquifer. Also, the potential for saltwater intrusion. It's important for us to be aware of these things. We've touched on water quality, and then finally, one of the challenges is borehole siting, and there are many international standards around proper borehole siting, and so I would encourage you to, if you haven't seen those that even RWSN provides, just ensuring that we're familiar with what the best practices are and the standards are when it comes to borehole siting. I want to share a little bit about just water missions approach and how we utilize groundwater. And so, in response to many of these challenges, we try to take a holistic and technical approach. Ramon mentioned a lot of what my team works on is beyond just the technical side of things or the technology. But there's a couple things that are best practices for us or standards for us. And so one, we start with hydrogeological surveys to obviously assess the aquifer health and sustainability before any type of development. And I think this is critical. And so it's just, I think the most important thing is find reputable companies that can do these hydrogeological surveys for you and ensuring that you're having good work done. We also look at long-term system planning. So how do we professionalize that planning? So looking at 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, how do we accommodate for future population growth? Because that's also important, ensuring the health of the borehole. We employ solar-powered pumping systems. And this we find reduces emissions from a climate perspective, and also it reduces the operational costs. And currently to date, we've installed over 1,200 solar-powered pumping systems globally, and we've seen a pretty significant just low failure rate with these systems. Our systems also include real-time monitoring that enables our teams to do proactive maintenance and also just provide long-term functionality. And so we're looking at monitoring groundwater levels. We monitor flow of the water, the quality. So, often using ORP sensors. We look at turbidity or conductivity. We also monitor system pressure, even prepaid metering from the financial side. And so a lot of this allows us to, over time, monitor, system performance trends, looking at water consumption patterns, aquifer behavior, water safety, the financial sustainability of these schemes. But I think it's important to note that we're not just focusing on the technology, but also on long-term sustainability, equity, and also the community empowerment. And these principles really guide every project that we implement at Water Mission. Next slide, please. So if you're sitting here, well, I'll share this. This is just a schematic of one of our safe water projects at Water Mission. So you can see this is typically how we design all of our schemes. So from the borehole development, we're utilizing solar to provide power, putting all the water through a treatment house using Water Mission's in-house erosion chlorinator. And you'll see the box on the top. That's our remote monitoring technology. And so we install these on every single project that we're installing. And then water is pumped up to a safe storage container and then piped throughout a community. This would be to community access points, households, hospitals, clinics, churches. And so this just gives you an idea of how we're implementing projects globally. Next slide, please. So if you're sitting here today thinking, where do I begin? How do I get started, doing this? I think one of the things that we did at Water Mission a couple of years ago is we just started sitting down as a team and as an organization and really wanting to incorporate climate change resilience into our programming, into the things that we're actively monitoring and measuring. And so we started to talk about what does success look like for us as an organization, or perhaps what does success within, a program or project look like? And so, being able to sit down with your organization, if you have that level of influence, or even as an individual contributor within your organization, it's a good exercise to sit down and start thinking about what are the activities that we can do? What do we hope that these activities will accomplish, both in the short term and in the long term? And that's all part of just really good impact planning and impact management. So you'll see on this slide, I've shared some of the activities that Water Mission does for all of our programming, what we hope that we would be accomplishing through these activities, and then ultimately what our impact, that we're working towards as an organization long term. Next slide. So just a few examples of some of these, some of the activities and the indicators that we're tracking on climate change resilience. And then on the final slide, you'll see what we are measuring as part of just short-term changes as well. Recently, over the last few years, we've had an opportunity to engage in a carbon financing program where we actively monitored, measured these indicators, and had them verified by a third-party auditor, and were able to access climate financing. So I think it's exciting for us to get to this stage, but really it's, it all starts with sitting down within your organization and thinking through how you can incorporate climate change into your programming. What are some of these measures that you could be managing, and then potentially maybe even tap into some alternative financing that can help support this work. So I'm excited to be able to share that with you today. I appreciate just the time and your attention. I hope that this presentation has shed some light on the critical role of groundwater in building a climate resilient resource for rural water communities. But I'd love to continue the dialogue. So please feel free to contact me. My email address is listed, and I just hope that we can continue to working together towards just a more secure water resilient future. So thank you. And Ramon, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Lara. Thank you so much for this presentation. And I think it gave a good impression of how what the potential of groundwater is, but also the risks and the challenges to manage and it sustainably and to make use of it for socio-economic development. So I would pose to you here one question before we the others could be maybe kept for the panel discussion later. Maybe here, let just me see. Here's one from Moses Muendo. Greetings. I would like to understand what overpumping would be since the submersible pumps are sized depending on aquifer yield. Do you have some experiences about that? It's a very hydrogeological question. Maybe if you prefer another one, I would pose it maybe later to a hydrogeologist.
I mean, I could answer, but there are better experts on the call, that can provide insights to that. So keep it for the panel discussion, but I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'll take a look at the questions in
Here's one
the
for
chat
you.
box as well.
How can rural communities be empowered to manage groundwater sustainably without relying entirely on external experts? I really like that question. I think you are
right. Absolutely. And I think this is one thing that we're not spending time in rural communities educating communities around just the significant resource that is available right under their feet, and what are some opportunities not just to access that water, but then also to manage that sustainably. So this should be embedded in our capacity building and our community training, and not just be left to the experts to, essentially be paid to come in and either create that water source or manage that water source. So definitely comes back to training and working with communities, and not just training, but education. So let's provide that education both to rural communities, also just to local government, national governments. We're having this conversation at a global scale today, but there's many people that are missing out on that conversation.
Thank you so much, Laura. So yeah, this question is really good because it shows again how much diversity of expertise you need to design such a project, and it's a really holistic approach to make it sustainable. So, and we have a last presentation, and this presentation goes even more on the ground. And I mentioned already that the theme for the World Water Day this year was climate action. And so we see here the two presenters. This presentation is shared by Renée Feldman and Nancy Cadeni. And so that what kind of methods are possible to enhance or improve the water balance and make water usable, which is maybe not available at the right time, at the right place, and the concept of water buffering. So we start with Renée, who he is expert in agricultural water management, and both are working for Meta, and Nancy has an expertise in nature conservation. Is it correct, Nancy? I think so, yeah. Yeah, please, Renée, go ahead and with your the presentation on water buffering.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ramon, for the introduction and also for the opportunity to for Nancy and myself to join this webinar. So indeed, this webinar is focusing more on the solutions to buffer and to infiltrate water back into the groundwater. I will share a few options which can be done at a household and a small community level, and Nancy will go more into the options at a larger scale. Maybe to go to the next slide, to shortly introduce the Meta. So it's a company based in Wageningen in the Netherlands. Recently, we joined the GOPA group. Recently is last year. And we also have, as Meta, offices in several countries, including Ethiopia, Kenya, Turkey, Yemen, and Nepal. And we have about 45 colleagues. Most of our themes, they evolve around land and water management. I think most of the Meta work started with groundwater, so that's also quite in the core of our work. Some of you might have heard of the smart centers or the work of the smart center group, and that's also an initiative which is hosted by Meta. And then I think we can go to the next slide indeed. So this webinar is about the climate change, climate effects on rural water supply. Well, I think as Ramon also showed in the context, especially of sub-Saharan Africa, groundwater is in a way only 5% of the available groundwater, I believe, is used for either agriculture or water supply. So in a way, there is a lot of potential. At the same time, we also have to make sure that this potential remains available towards the future. But groundwater is a very much a resource that can be used for economic development of the communities. And we can go to the next slide. So I'll present a few after this one actually. When looking into groundwater and also into using water sustainably, you always have to consider where's the water coming from and how can we make sure that this source will remain in the future. And then storing water in the ground is always by far the sort of cheapest option, as opposed to building big concrete structures above ground. And when using water, always take into account the water balance, where I think also the first presenter, Koos Groen, also referred to. And I think it's important to have a mix of affordable water technologies. Affordable meaning that households or communities can have access to them in terms of the technique, but also that they are within what they can afford. And then ensuring that the water balance is in balance. So what is pumped out should be recharged. That's basically the principle to be able to use the groundwater in a sustainable way. Then as mentioned on the next slide, there's one of the examples where as the smart centers we have been working with, it's called tube recharge. And basically, yeah, you can install a small pipe into the ground in the nearby a hand duct or a shallow drilled well, which captures water, which is runoff water or from the roof. And through a sand filter, you can infiltrate it back into the same aquifer where you pump the water out. And it's a very simple, basic technology or solution, which in terms of material costs only $20, but it has the potential to recharge up to 200 cubic meter of water per year. And yeah, we've seen examples where initially the well was drying up in the dry season, but after the installation of the tube recharge, the well would provide water year round. We can go to the next slide. Well, there's also more yeah, low-cost household level options for storing the water. So one is yeah, using plastic tanks or plastic liners. I think yeah, Nancy will also recognize them from the Kenya setting. So basically, you are digging a pit, which yeah, to avoid yeah, seepage of the water, you apply a plastic liner, and then you can use the water either in your garden or after treatment. You can also use it for home use. And similarly, you can also build a tank from yeah, from bricks and wire, called a wire brick cement tank. There's also an option which is called the EMAS underground tank. So that's a cement tank made only with a few bags of cement, and it can be quite yeah, a considerable size. And it's made by plastering basically the sides of the yeah, the soil and then covering it with a lid. And in combination with an EMAS pump, the water can also be pumped up for use in the homestead. On the next slide, there's another option which can be made by local artisans. It's called a calabash tank. So calabash, yeah, resembling the shape of a calabash. It's especially applied in Guinea-Bissau and the countries around. And it can be made in different sizes. Again, the water is collected from the rooftop, and then it can be used for home consumption. And yeah, if you really have a considerable volume, it could also be used in the context of agriculture. And yeah, these above ground storage options are especially useful in cases where the groundwater is not suitable for consumption, maybe because of presence of salts. And otherwise, yeah, the preferred option would always be to store it in the ground itself. Maybe to go to the next slide. Yeah, one technology which is applied has been applied more and more in Malawi is called deep bed farming. It's yeah, promoted by an organization called TNI. And deep bed farming basically is a principle to break the hard pan, which is present in a lot of agricultural fields, maybe at a depth of 50 centimeters. The soil is very compacted, and as a result, the rainwater which falls infiltrates, but it doesn't infiltrate all the way into the aquifer. And through the deep bed farming method, you break this hard pan and you allow the water to infiltrate into the aquifer. So on the next slide, there's also a schematic overview of how the method works on the right side. So basically, you dig yeah, small, very small ponds where the water can collect, and it has the time to infiltrate. And then in between, you can grow your crops, your cash crop, or your maize or your grains, depending on the crops which are preferable in the context. And it can also be combined with yeah, with organic farming, with organic matter mixing, cover crops, and also there's minimum tillage, which really reduces the soil erosion, and also reduces the filling of rivers and ponds with sediments downstream in the catchment. And on the next slide, and I think which is the nice thing of the deep bed farming method and similar methods is that you really empower the farmers, the land users, to become the catchment managers, and they come in charge, and they also benefit directly from the water which is infiltrated and which is collected. And part of this water can be used in their own agriculture on their own field, and part can be used in downstream use for refilling of aquifers for maybe, which is maybe pumped up only 10 years from now, but it has to be infiltrated at some point. And in the picture, you see the difference between, on the right, this method has been applied, and on the left, the sort of traditional ridges and the slashing of, which is common in Malawi, has been applied. And I think from the health of the crop, you can see which method is more effective. Maybe the next slide. Now this is the last slide, and then I will hand over to my colleague Nancy. There are a lot of other methods which can be applied at farmer scale, or field scale, field level. And these are very essential because if you look at the landscape, I think most of the soil surface is farmland. So if you increase the infiltration of water in farmland and you avoid runoff and avoid erosion, I think that will have a very big impact on the capturing of water, and also the maintenance of the catchment for the deeper aquifers. So over to you, Nancy.
Thanks, Renier, for this. I know we are really discussing more on groundwater, but as we walk also from anywhere we walk, be it in towns, be it on roads in our villages, have you ever wondered where much of the runoff is taken to, or what can we do with this runoff that we see from all over the places in our fields, on our roads, and also in our cities? There is also different technologies, the way Renier has mentioned, on use of the half moons or semicircular bands. This, for example, in the areas of the rangelands, for rangelands restoration, where we can be able to harvest much of this runoff in these areas. Another component is more on road runoff harvesting. What can we do with this runoff? And also utilization of sand dams that brings together different communities and the government as a way of utilizing sand dams to harvest water and also restore the lands, and also different interventions that we can do in our cities, in our towns, and also the small places where we stay. Would you please move to the next slide? Yeah, when you look on the left side, for my case, you find a lot of damage or all what we experience during the rains on our road. Some of us also face challenges of just moving from one place to another because their roads are not passable. But this is not only a problem. This can always be turned around to different interventions or to different ways, and we are able to enjoy the rains and our roads. And by adopting the road runoff, we are able to really kill 3 birds or more birds with one stone. That is, for example, reducing the road maintenance. This means our road engineers will be very happy. And for those of us in water management, land restoration, we'll be able to restore the lands next to the roads and also beyond that are being degraded by all this runoff that goes away. And this water can also be stored for more beneficial use, for example, in agricultural production, tree growing, and also regrading in different areas. Please, next slide. Yeah, this is just an example of different ways on how we can be able to harvest the road runoff. These are examples of cases of Kenya in one of the regions that we call Makueni County, located in one of the semi-arid regions. This area receives very minimal amount of rainfall, and there's also high runoff that happens. But this water from the roads can be harvested and stored in the farm for different ways. For example, if you just look at the first photo where people are walking, you use the simple techniques that we call the miter drains. Others call them trenches, where you divert the water from the roads to the miter drains using the cutoffs. And inside the trenches or the terraces, you can be able to grow your different crops, things like the bananas, mangoes, oranges. And in your farm, you continue doing your other farming activities. And if your pocket is good at large scale level, you can do a bigger on-farm pond, for example, on the second photo where you can have an on-farm pond, direct the water there, store it so that during the dry season, you can get that water from there for your own agricultural production, as well as also livestock utilization, and the many more examples that you can see along the road. The other one where you see the lady in dress there, I'm sure if you walk along that pathway, you can just enjoy seeing the bananas, the napier grass, and also the nice road. That's one of the rural roads also where we work in. Next slide. Yeah, and just to take you through maybe on what happens when we adopt this road runoff, if you look at the first row, how the road would look like or looks like before we adopt the road runoff. You clearly see these are small pathway that is being used just for people to move around. And then you move to the next photo when we adopt the road runoff harvesting. For example, that is one of the projects where we're using the plant operator to divert the water from the road after the county had done the grading by digging the meter drains. And just next to it is a farm where these meter drains were directed to, where you see now some bananas flourishing. If you compare to the first photo where the area was just left hanging. Again, if you move to the next row, you can still harvest this water, store it in an on-farm pond or a barrow pit. A barrow pit is where our engineers get the maram for road construction. They dig this hole to get the maram for road construction. Some refill it and others leave it. But in this case, under Roads for Water, you can easily renovate this barrow pit as your also water storage facility, where you can use this water for agricultural production, and more water can also be able to infiltrate to the ground. Next slide. Yeah, generally when I mentioned with the green roads for water, there is a lot of also multiple benefits that we can benefit from there. For example, with the water security, where we now have more water in our farms for agricultural production, we are also able to control our water table and also recharge our groundwater. And when we have water, you are assured of also being food secure. People can be able to diversify into different agricultural production activities, and also increasing their income from the sale of produce. And with the good roads, people can be able to move from one place to another easily. For example, also taking your produce from your farm to the market. You don't need to wait for the rains to end or for the water from the roads to go down, and then you can start moving around. But people are able easily to move freely from one place to another with their goods. And also the children can easily access things like the schools. We can access hospitals by adopting the green roads for water. And we are all affected by these matters of climate change, which is also a good solution towards climate adaptation and also resilience, where we are able to harvest these runoff uses for better ways. And the green roads for water brings everyone on board. For example, the communities, the different government departments like the roads, water, agriculture, environment, everyone is inclusively brought on together to work on this initiative. Next slide. Yeah, and for those of us who come from the arid and semi-arid areas, we really experience seasonal rivers or sandy rivers, where a lot of also runoff just goes through. We can adopt one of the technologies that we call the sand dams. These are lines that you dig across the river at a specific depth, so that when rain comes, first of all, the sand is able to stop, and more water can be able to percolate in the sand and storage. And now the excess water is the one that flows on top of now the sand dam to the next and flows downwards. And this way you find more water is able to is stored upstream also, and you can easily get the water from there for different use, both for your domestic use and also do your small farmer-led irrigation by getting just the water stored from they've stored in the sand upstream using the sand dam. Next slide. Yeah, this is just a quick comparison when we talk of also groundwater recharge and what do we get out of it. If you were to choose photo A or photo B, depending on where you are and what you want, I don't know which one you would choose for. I'm curious to hear from you. Photo A, you see there's a community where they get water from this sand river by what we call sand scooping, where they wait for the rains. After the rain subsides or they go down, the women go to dig these holes to fetch water there for their domestic use. You can also clearly look at how the quality of the water is and for how long are they going to have access to this water. When you look at photo B, this is a well that is dug next to a sand dam, where one is able just to come pump the water and take it home for water use. And you'll find this one also has an impact on the quality of water that they use and the duration that they'll be able to have water access. So if you are in this community, will you continue doing the sand scooping or you'll have a sand dam together with a hand pump? Next slide. Yeah, for those of us or a few of us who stay in towns, we also wonder what can be done. I stay in Nairobi and you find also when it rains, there's a lot of just water within the city in some areas within the town. And such kind of water can also be harvested and used to also enhance our groundwater recharge and also for beneficial use within the city or to benefit the households next to the city. For example, by still adopting the road runoff harvesting, promotion of roof water harvesting or catchment and store it in the tanks, the way Renia had presented some water storage facilities. We have also promotion of tree growing for the green cities and so many multiple things that we can be able to do within our cities and following together with the different partners, with different people who stay in the cities. And together with this, we'll also still be able to achieve SDG 6, 9, and also 13 through the sponge cities. Next slide. Yeah, generally, as I conclude, you find the rural places in sub-Saharan Africa are highly affected with the access to basic service that is mainly with water. As usual, someone should walk within 30 minutes or less than 30 minutes, but you find many of our communities in sub-Saharan Africa walk for more than even an hour, 2 hours just to have access to this basic service, which is water. And the areas where people get water by use of hand pumps, you also find very few people have access to that, where you find 20 to 40% are really broken. Sometimes there's lack of ownership, lack of funds for maintenance, so these hand pumps are just left there. The water is there, but the community can't utilize the water because the hand pumps are broken. Next slide. Yeah, as we say, there are so many ways that we can do to enhance our climate resilience and also recharge our groundwater. We can easily adopt simple ways, for example, by enhancing access to this basic service, for example, with the $25, where we can be able to adopt different techniques like the SMART techniques. Some of them are presented by Renee and others by I. Enhancing ownership, mainly by bringing the community together, working with them all the way from project ideation, planning, and to implementation, for them really to have the ownership and bring the different communities and also a family to own something that they can also be really proud of it. That means they'll still be able to take care of what was done or what was supported to them because they took part from stage 1 to the last stage. That also enhancing better sustainability. And the interventions we promote in this area, let us also add an income generating activity so that one can be able to get some more income from it. For example, if you have a hand pump, the income here can also be utilized in maintenance of these hand pumps so that the communities can continue utilizing the water. There's also need for high training and capacity building of our people to adopt these technologies and also skills, as well as leveraging on community local knowledge. Next slide. Yeah, more information of these techniques that have been presented, you can be able to share, to follow via this link. My colleague Aline also has just shared some of the links in the chat. Thank you for that. Next slide. Yeah, and when we all come together in these areas of management, groundwater, climate resilience, I'm sure we will end up with a very happy society where everyone is comfortable, happy in the pocket, as well as happy on the table, and also a happy environment where we live in. We say thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nancy. My name is David Inman. I serve as the Vice President of Standards at Water Mission. I'm going to guide us now into our time of some panel discussion. So just as a reminder to all of our participants, please place your questions in the Q&A box. We already have received many questions and we're working to answer those as we proceed. As we move into our panel discussion now, I'd like to also introduce to all of our participants Geraint Burrows. Geraint is a hydrogeologist and a WASH engineer. In 2012, Geraint founded Groundwater Relief, and the purpose is to link groundwater expertise from the private, public, and academic sectors to the aid and development sectors. Geraint, welcome to our panel. I would like to start our discussion today with a question posed to Geraint. Geraint, in your experience, what do you see as some of the most promising and strategic approaches to being wise stewards of groundwater resources in the face of climate change?
Yeah, thanks, David, and good to be joining everybody here on this panel and call. I think when we talk about stewardship of water resources, we would potentially look at the leaders of the stewardshipness, which is, of course, the water authorities within each particular country. And I think, first of all, I would say that we need to empower them and provide them with the resources they need to do their job. In many of the places that groundwater relief works, we find that water authorities are very under-resourced and are lacking a lot of those basic materials, such as even offices and computers and things like that, to be able to do their jobs properly. So supporting them would be a great start. And then I suppose getting the basics correct. So in order for us to manage our water resources effectively, we have to understand those water resources, which means collecting basic data such as water levels, water quality. So being able to create systematic monitoring programs across vulnerable aquifer systems in countries that we're working in, and ensuring that that data is then made open and available would be a great start to helping us as water professionals understand those water resources and then be able to start to understand what's happening with them, the trends, how vulnerable they are, and then be able to take corrective action. I mean, the way that groundwater resources, I suppose, are most effectively managed at the moment is through modeling. So through collecting that kind of basic data and then creating groundwater models, we can then start to run all kinds of scenarios through those models, including climate change models, in order to be able to start to understand what those impacts of climate change might be on groundwater resources. And we've seen some pretty interesting maps earlier on today showing predicting groundwater level, and groundwater as a resource actually appears in many places to be becoming a more and more important resource when we look at drought, because of course of that storage, that great storage that the groundwater resources provide. So I suppose those would be my initial thoughts on that.
Great, thank you. And I think this presents a good opportunity perhaps for Dr. Groen. We've had a number of questions regarding the model that you presented and the seeming paradox between potential groundwater recharge in areas that are currently also experiencing significant droughts. Could you speak to that for just a moment?
Yeah, well, I already answered that question. I think that this study I showed you, it gives you an overview of the groundwater recharge in the future climate, but you must see that this is a sort of average over a longer period. I mean, even then, if groundwater increases, then still you have to face large drought, and they maybe even become more frequent, but the overall groundwater recharge could still be increasing. So, and that was a bit, I like to be a bit provocative, so I started out with this one because you see in many documents, they say, okay, groundwater is changing, so climate is changing, so groundwater is at risk and groundwater is depleting and groundwater levels are falling, but that's not always the case. I mean, maybe if groundwater is at risk, it's maybe more because of over-exploitation rather than climate change. So that's the point I wanted to make. But still, droughts are, of course, have large impacts on all those suggestions we have seen in the previous presentation. They're all very worldwide valid, and they could sustain communities during drought, that's for sure. But on the other hand, you see that where I'm working now in the Horn of Africa, you see that the community still rely on deep boreholes, because despite of these initiatives on shallow groundwater, they still rely on deep boreholes, because these are the only ones which keep on producing water during droughts. So they are quite important, these deep aquifers, despite of all the initiatives let's say at the surface.
Thank you. Maybe with just regards to that, Gerent, I know that Groundwater Relief is working on some important guidance for the sector around siting of boreholes. Could you perhaps just enlighten us a bit with that guidance and maybe what you'll be tackling with that and when we might expect to see that?
Yeah, thank you. No, we're currently working with Oxfam to develop a guidance document aimed at WASH practitioners to support them with the construction of groundwater infrastructure resilience to flood and drought risks posed by climate change. The guidance is going to be focused around practical advice and off-the-shelf sort of technical designs, and it's situated within the framework of a project called Guidance on WASH Resilience and Risk Reduction for Climate Change, financed by the German Federal Foreign Office. We're in the first phase of the project with a second phase, then trialing out a draft of the guidance in the summer of this year, looking to finalize and release the final document at the end of this year. So for anyone who's got interesting case studies or potentially have been working with existing construction designs for flood resilient boreholes, for example, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact Groundwater Relief. Would be very interested to have a chat to you and to incorporate any of your advice within that document.
Great, thank you so much, Gerent. Perhaps backing up to a broader view of climate risk assessment at the community level, Laura, would you mind maybe speaking to the question that was posed by one of our participants? What are the ways to conduct climate risk assessments, and what sorts of tools exist to help conduct those assessments?
Thanks, David. Yeah, I did put an answer to that, so for those of you that want to take a look. But I think, one, it's very contextual based on your programming as well in your specific region and where you work. So one, having a good understanding of the current context, what are some of the climate risks in that region, better understanding rainfall patterns, drought, heavy rainfall, and then really designing your program with the intent to answer the questions that you're trying to answer. And so we actually developed our climate risk assessment tools in-house. We utilize resources from UNICEF as well as the World Bank. We looked at a very vast variety of indicators and risk measures, and we wanted to contextualize that to what we were trying to accomplish. In some of the countries that Water Mission works, we're also there's regulation around a climate risk assessment for your water project. So when you're developing a new borehole, we have to submit these climate assessments, risk assessments to the government. So specifically even in Kenya, and they have to give approval for you to be able to move forward with your project once you've demonstrated that you're not potentially creating further harm through the work that you're doing. So one, I think understanding your current context, ensuring that you're abiding by regulation, and then just looking at your program design and creating those tools that match what you're trying to do. Data is wonderful, but it costs a lot of money to collect, and we just need to ensure that we're collecting the right data, what we call the right fit data at Water Mission. So there are some great resources. Look at the World Bank, look at UNICEF. There are many others, and try to customize that to your specific context.
Thank you, Laura. I'd like to maybe shift focus to some questions that have some insights into the practical actions and solutions that Meta addressed. Rainier, one of the questions is around current irrigation practices to reduce, let's say, water waste. And I would like to see if you might speak to some of the irrigation systems that you have seen that are most effective for efficient management of water resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that question. I think I also I answered to it, and there was someone else who answered that drip tapes can be used as a very efficient way, and I think they are, but also very context specific, and the user really has to know what he or she is doing. And I would also like to sort of bounce back the question a bit, that I think often the water which we see as going to waste with irrigation is not going to waste at all, because it ends up in the groundwater. And down the road or downhill, it will be used a second or third or fourth time. And it's also quite a general question, so I'll give a bit of a general answer. I think most of the sort of water saving is not so much in the infrastructure, but more in how the water is managed. So what arrangement is there between farmers or between whoever is dividing the water, and whether it is tailored with the timing of the farmer who is using the water. So I think that's I think the sort of most efficient system really depends on the skill and what is already there. So not a very specific answer, but I hope some food for thought.
Yeah, thank you, Rainier. And Nancy, the presentation you shared a bit on the green roads approach was very interesting. I think there was a great question posed around water quality coming off of roads. Are there any concerns from Meta around potential contaminants from vehicles such as petroleum products, rubber waste? What are some ways that you can help protect water quality from road runoff?
Thanks, David. Indeed, that's also an interesting question and a general also point of concern. You find that with the green roads water, there are different interventions that I didn't mention much of them, whereby you also incorporate in road runoff harvest. For example, also of using green infrastructures or vegetation. I will talk of, for example, planting of vetiver grass at the check dams where you direct the water to. You find they also help in absorbing such kind of contaminants. And when you're also harvesting this runoff, for example, from the highways, we always recommend for water quality to be done. And for my case, what we've done in rural setup, for example, in Makueni County, we work on rural roads that are not tarmac. You find the water is also best fit for agricultural production and livestock use.
Thank you very much, Nancy. This was an interesting question I hadn't considered, but someone asked the question of, is there a potential to utilize failed boreholes as recharge wells. Perhaps one of our hydrogeologists could speak to that concept of using failed boreholes as recharge wells. Is that practical? Is that good practice? So maybe answer from your perspectives on that.
Yeah, thank you, David. That's an interesting question. I remember we had a project in Bangladesh where we used abandoned boreholes in the city to recharge the aquifer by collecting water from rooftops and things like that. And but these were abandoned because the water level had gone down and the wells dried up. If you have wells which are abandoned because there is something stuck, then yeah, you can't use them anymore. But indeed, the abandoned boreholes could be used for recharge. But mind you, injection wells, because then it's becoming an injection well. It's not easy to maintain an injection wells. We have quite some here in the Netherlands, but it's a daily operation. You have to monitor them very closely, and they tend to clog. You have to rehabilitate them every few years. So I don't think it's a solution for a community because it takes so much operation and maintenance and monitoring, and I wonder whether this is really an option.
Yeah, that points back to some of the lower technology options, such as sand dams that we heard Meta presenting. So good.
Yeah, that's more appropriate. Yeah.
Very good. Well, I would just like to thank all of our speakers and panelists on behalf of Rural Water Supply Network and the Sustainable Groundwater Development Theme for your contributions to the webinar today. And thank you to all of our participants for all of the terrific questions. Certainly, by the number of registrants to this subject, there was no shortage of interest in this topic of groundwater utilization and climate. And again, to reiterate some of the key points of this webinar, groundwater is certainly an untapped resource in many regions around the world. And it is seen as a resource that can provide safeguards against climate variability and climate change. But I'll reiterate the importance of effective planning and management of groundwater resources, the importance of careful planning and even terms of reference in the procurement process that happens. I believe I saw one of the participants ask a question about how can overpumping happen if the pump is sized to the capacity of the borehole. Well, unfortunately, sometimes the pump is not sized to the capacity of the borehole. The pump is provided for a tender that has nothing to do with the capacity of the borehole. So getting back to some of the foundational practices of good development of groundwater are extremely important. I'm just going to point you all to some resources that you might access. All the presentations are available on Rural Water Supply Network's website, both video of this as well as the content. I believe we've already pasted links to the slides that were shared by speakers today. There's contact information for all the speakers. So if you heard something today that sparked some follow-up questions, you'd like to reach out and contact our speakers, they'd be glad to engage with you. Furthermore, we want to remind everyone that we have some more upcoming webinars soon. This is a series of early webinars that Rural Water Supply Network is hosting this year. So our next one coming up is on 20 May at the same time, 1400 Central European, and it will focus on the diagnosis and physical audit of boreholes and pumps, striving for accountability. Very important topic to the sector of accountability of infrastructure, of making sure that the infrastructure that's being developed is being maintained and developed in a good way according to standards from the beginning. You can see some other topics that are coming up there that we look forward to hearing about. And then we do have a post-webinar survey. We'd greatly appreciate you participating in the post-webinar survey. I believe that will be shared out. And one of the questions that we posed to you all that we would really like your insight on is around some of the practices that you are using in your work, in your organization, in your institution to address climate variability and climate change with your development of groundwater. So very much looking forward to hearing from those that can take time to join and participate in the post-webinar survey. So once again, as we close in on our time here, I want to thank everyone for joining. I want to encourage you in your work. We do a lot of work sometimes in let's say, behind the scenes in the work that we do in the wash sector. But we all know the importance of water to human well-being. And so I want to just personally thank you for the work that you're doing in this important field. We're toiling quietly together to make impact across the world. So I want to just congratulate everyone that's involved in this work. Finally, I just want to also give thanks to the Rural Water Supply Network team. There was a number of folks at Rural Water Supply Network working behind the scenes to make this go smoothly. They always do a great job. And so thank you to all of Rural Water Supply Network's Secretariat team that's helped, and to the SCAP Foundation, who's an important partner of Rural Water Supply Network and also has folks that have been working behind the scene to make this go smoothly. So until then, we thank you again for your participation. We look forward to the next webinar. Have a great day and evening. So long, everyone.